Night. So go, Kristen. Thank you guys for getting up way too early with us on this Thursday morning. Morning Joe starts right now.
Look, I get that this president wants full credit for the economy he inherited and zero blame for the pandemic that he ignored. But you know what? The job doesn't work that way. Tweeting at the television doesn't fix things. Making stuff up doesn't make people's lives better. You've got to have a plan. You've got to put in the work.
That pandemic is rounding the corner. They hate it when I say it. You know, you turn on to this MSDNC and fake news CNN, all you hear is COVID, 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 COVID. That's all they put on because they want to scare the hell out of everyone. And you know, the more testing you have, the more cases. They say cases are up. Yeah, testing is up. We have more testing than India, China, and almost every other country put together.
We literally left this White House a pandemic playbook that would have shown them how to respond before the virus reached our shores. They probably used it to, I don't know, prop up a wobbly table somewhere. We don't know where that playbook went. 8 months into this pandemic, cases are rising again across this country. Donald Trump isn't suddenly going to protect all of us. He can't even take the basic steps to protect himself.
With COVID, is there anything that you think you could have done differently? If you had a mulligan or a do-over on one aspect of the way you handled it, what would it be?
Not much. Look, it's all over the world. You have a lot of great leaders. There are a lot of smart people. It's all over the world. It came out of China. China should have stopped it. They stopped it from spreading into other parts of China after Wuhan. But China should have stopped it. No, not much. I did it very early.
Just last night, he complained up in Erie that the pandemic made him go back to work. I'm quoting here. He was upset that the pandemic's made him go back to work. If he'd actually been working the whole time, it never would have gotten this bad.
Oh, my God. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Thursday, October 22nd. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have historian and Vanderbilt University professor John Meacham, politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University, politics editor at The Grio, and an MSNBC political contributor, Jason Johnson, and NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent and host of Way Too Early, Casey Hunt is with us.
You know, Willie, it was hard to imagine having two presidents any different than George W. Bush and Barack Obama. But there you see a split screen of Barack Obama and Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, late into October, less than 2 weeks to go until the election, is still living in an age of magical thinking, where he is still saying that we're turning the corner, things are getting better, this while school systems are shutting down, outbreaks are raging across the Midwest, things are getting worse. You talk to doctors, you talk to epidemiologists, the situation is getting worse. And yet Donald Trump is sitting there still acting like this is a media hoax. You remember way back at the beginning when Donald Trump in February called this a media hoax? He's actually reverted back. And then, oh, by the way, all of the anti-Trump fools that have really been shamefully responsible for the continued support of this man by a lot of their people. A lot of the anti-Trump fools said, oh, no, he wasn't calling it a hoax. He was just saying the media was whipping it up into a frenzy. And no, he called it a hoax.
Yeah.
He's doing the same thing now, suggesting that networks that cover the deadliest pandemic in over a century as it rages into the fall are somehow part of this media hoax. He has learned absolutely nothing 220,000 deaths later.
I had the same thought watching that speech last night, which is that if he made that speech in February, it wouldn't have been much different than it is today. The difference is, instead of 0 deaths or 1 death at that time, there are now 223,360 deaths. The same way we say a lot of these rallies could have been lifted out of 2016 with the lock her up chants and the attacks on the media and all that strategy and placed into 2020. This speech looked like something from another time where we hadn't learned anything. And where, as you say, if you look at the map, cases are spiking across the country. That's not a matter of opinion. That's a matter of data. That's a matter of science. It's real. It's happening. It's not a hoax. So, yes, we're going to continue to talk about COVID. But you're right, there couldn't have been a bigger contrast with President Obama and a systematic takedown, unlike we haven't seen before, of the last 4 years under President Trump.
Yeah, it was quite something. And by the way, those cases around the country, there are small surge spots that will happen wherever this president has held his super spreader events. Dating back from Tulsa, one of the rallies that led to a spread in coronavirus, you know, state and local health officials have been watching the numbers. When he holds a super spreader event, the numbers go up. So he's adding to it, as opposed to subtracting on these numbers. He's adding. We have a slew of new battleground state polling yesterday. In Pennsylvania, Biden leads by 10 points in the latest CNN SSRS poll, by 8 points in the new Quinnipiac University poll, by 7 points in the latest USA Today Suffolk University poll, and by 5 in the new Fox News poll. Let's go to Iowa. The latest Monmouth poll puts Biden up by 3, which falls within the margin of error. The New York Times Siena College poll also has Biden up 3 points within the margin of error. And the Emerson College poll has Trump up 2 points, also within that margin. In Florida, both the latest CNN SSRS and the Reuters Ipsos polls show Biden leading by 4 points, 50 to 46%. Within the margins of error. In Michigan, the new Fox News poll has Biden up by 12, 52 to 40%. In Wisconsin, the Fox News poll has Biden up 5 points, 49 to 44. In Arizona, the latest Reuters Ipsos poll has Biden with a 3-point lead, 49 to 46, within the margin of error. And in Ohio, the Fox News poll shows Trump ahead by 3 points, 48 to 45, within the margin of error. Let's look at Texas. The latest Quinnipiac University poll there shows the two candidates tied at 47% apiece. That's a lot of different states to look at, Joe. What do they tell you? Well,
what they tell us is what we've been thinking for some time, and that is that, again, Willie, that Donald Trump is having real problems in the area where he was expecting to, run to victory, in the upper Midwest, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Those states were the states that gave him, obviously, a shocking victory in 2016. But you look at Pennsylvania, plus 10, plus 8, plus 7, plus 5, Michigan, plus 12, Wisconsin, a plus 5 poll there, which is a little below what it usually is. And even in Iowa, 2 polls out yesterday showing that Joe Biden up by 3 points. That's, of course, a state that Donald Trump carried by 9. Again, if this were any other candidate, if this were any other election cycle, we would be talking about the end for Donald Trump. But, of course, it's not, because there were a lot of polls that showed Donald Trump doing poorly 4 years ago. The question is, do the pollsters have it right this year? And if they do, even in the state of Florida, where these polls suggest he's down by 4, I still think it's going to end up being a 1-point race. If it's more than a 1-point race, either direction, then election night over the rest of the country, this election's not going to be close. But you look right now, the numbers look very good for Joe Biden. But, of course, the big asterisk is that the polls looked really good for Hillary Clinton at this point 4 years ago.
Yeah, they did. Not quite this good, though, that they do for Joe Biden in the public polling anyway. And the problem for Donald Trump is there's not a lot of time to change the dynamic of this race. We're 12 days from Election Day. As we know, there is a ton of mail-in balloting, voting, tens of millions of mail-in votes that have already been sent in. He's got a debate tonight. Do we really think anything's going to change? Is he suddenly going to convince a bunch of suburban women or a bunch of seniors that he's not who he's shown to be for the last 3.5 years? He doesn't have a lot of time to change. So if he's looking at those numbers and he's doing rallies where he's drilling deeper into the base and not expanding the map, it doesn't leave him a lot of room to grow. Let's bring in national political correspondent for NBC News and MSNBC, Steve Kornacki. Steve, as you look at some of these pollings, you put it together with your map. What are some of the scenarios you see playing out here?
Yeah, let's take a look here at the road to 270 and what you see. This is how things landed in 2016. Of course, Trump with 306. But let's work off those poll numbers you were just going through right there, because I think 3 states you were just talking about them really jump out, and it's Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And remember, when Trump won those states in 2016, in all 3 of those states, his margin was less than a point. It was a fraction of a point. And, of course, these were also states that had not gone for a Republican in 3 decades, since the 1980s. So these were narrow wins in traditionally Democratic states that made all the difference. From how important are these states for Trump? Look at it this way. Those polls we just showed you, if Wisconsin went to Biden, if Michigan went to Biden, and if Pennsylvania went to Biden, those 3 states alone that Trump won by the skin of his teeth in 2016 would put Joe Biden over the top. And Trump would be in a position at that point. He could win Florida. He could win Carolina. He could win Arizona, Georgia, Texas, Ohio, Iowa, everything else you mentioned. He could sweep them if he does not get one of those 3 Midwest states that he flipped in 2016. He's under 270. He doesn't win the election. The only other thing he could do at that point is he could pick off a state that Hillary Clinton won in 2016. But then you're in a world where he's losing these 3 states, but somehow winning Minnesota. He's losing these 3 states, but somehow getting New Hampshire and Nevada. It becomes implausible if he can't hang on to at least one of these battleground states. And certainly his campaign has been treating Pennsylvania with 20 electoral votes as their most likely target there in terms of their time, in terms of their resources. You can see if Trump did find a way to hang on to Pennsylvania, okay, now he'd be back to 280. He'd have to defend Florida. He'd have to defend North Carolina. He still would have a very, very small margin for error. But just to stay in this thing on election night, that's one way of looking at it. I think these 3, he's got to find a way to win at least one.
And, of course, Steve, if he doesn't win Florida, Katie, bar the door. It's over. Right now, there are 2 polls that came out showing Joe Biden up by 4 points. That's hard to believe. It's hard to believe, again, talking to the people that know this state better than anybody else, it's hard to believe that this race is going to be decided by more than 1 percentage point. Talk about Florida and how actually the results that we get in, because we've been talking about weeks. You know, we may be doing this for weeks and weeks and months and months. Of course, the alternative to that is the fact that Florida could let us know by 9 p.m. on election night who's going to win in either direction. I remember in 2004 seeing the numbers come out of Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County, what Republicans call the killing fields, every 4 years. And I saw that George Bush had far outperformed how he did in 2000. And I turned to everybody on set then and said, this is not going to be 2000. George Bush is going to win Florida fairly comfortably and most likely win the rest of the country that way. Talk about what we may know actually by 8 p.m. election night.
Yeah, that's the fascinating thing, Joe. In Florida, they were kind of doing COVID-style elections before COVID. Extensive mail-in voting, extensive early voting, getting them all tabulated and reported out quickly so that, yeah, I think we're in a situation in Florida on election. These are famous last words, of course, because once upon a time in 2000, Florida was a disaster on election night. But if nothing like that happens, we're in a situation in Florida where we're going to get in that first hour when polls close in these counties all their early vote and all the mail-in vote that they've tabulated, and then the rest is going to come in most of these counties very quickly. And you're going to be able to look at counties in Florida, places along the Gulf Coast, for instance, where at about 8:30 on election night 2016, you could see Trump was running up the score compared to Mitt Romney 4 years earlier, where turnout was through the roof, and where you could say, okay, something is happening there in Florida, and then you could quickly work your way up and say North Carolina, you saw it, the Midwest, you saw it. But by 8:30, election night 2016, you had a sense that the political world was changing because of Florida. That could be the case again on election night 2020, because, again, I just reset it to 2016. If Biden were to get Florida, and you say it's possible you get a result there on election night relatively early, if Biden were to get Florida, that alone brings that total from Hillary Clinton's 232 to 261. That's not enough for Biden, but that puts him in a situation where basically any one other state, look, I just said Pennsylvania, but could be Michigan, any one other state with Florida pretty much would put him over 270. So, yeah, Florida kind of sets up as a state with the potential to get a lot of its vote in, to really give us a readout, and it kind of sets up as an early, almost elimination contest for Donald Trump. He's got to win it. He's got to win it. And we're going to get Florida and I think potentially North Carolina in those early hours. A lot of Carolina, at least.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Jason, as you look at all the numbers that come flooding out, of course, yesterday, numbers that the Trump campaign obviously is not pleased with. It's hard not to go back 4 years and say, well, Hillary was ahead as well. The one thing that the Biden people will say, even though they are really actually about as paranoid as any group you've ever seen, they will not say they have a chance to even win this election, but they will say this. They will say this. The one thing that Biden has that Hillary never had was a huge collection of polls where he was over 50%. That is, for anybody that's ever run, that is the magic number when you're looking at polling.
Yeah, Joe. So there's a couple things about these new poll numbers, and I always tell people when I teach my class, like how you read polls. Nobody is leading until somebody is averaging 49 to 50-something% of the vote. So when Hillary Clinton was leading in a lot of these states, 46 to 44, 48 to 42, there were too many undecideds. And undecideds tend to, you don't always know where they're going to go. Sometimes they break for the opposition. Sometimes they break for the incumbent. So that's one thing we've seen. Joe Biden hasn't just been leading in these states, but increasingly these polls, he's averaging 51, 52, 54, 55% of the vote. And that is huge. The second thing is really key. I remember this a lot with political scientists if you look 4 years ago. It's not that the polls in 2016 were wrong. It's that we were paying attention to the national polls and not the state polls. After the Comey letter, things were trending against Hillary Clinton in key Midwestern states. And everybody thought, this is sort of background noise, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't had that. If anything, all the October surprises, which at this point happen every 15 minutes, they've always been about Donald Trump. The bad news that's been breaking in October has been about Donald Trump, and we've seen polls trend in favor of Joe Biden. And the last thing is this, and I always say this is important anecdotally. Regardless of what we may see in the press, regardless of what the national polls may say, you can always tell how a race is going by looking at how members of the House and Senate are behaving. If they start backing away from Hillary Clinton, like we saw a little bit in 2016, that means their internal polls are like, okay, this could be bad. What have we seen? Ben Sass. What have we seen? We've seen more and more Republicans come out and say, hey, by the way, I wasn't in favor of the thing that President Trump was doing. And these are in red states that we're seeing it. So I think internally you're seeing Republicans be very, very concerned about these numbers. It doesn't just require sort of propaganda from the White House. And again, it's good that Joe Biden is not going to be complacent. It's good that they're still out there campaigning. But this is a race that, barring something strange, is trending towards Joe Biden at a state level in addition to a national one.
So, John Meacham, we are 12 days out from